today, very, very happy to have Kris Severson with us, former head of content partnership for HTC Vive, Vive, Sony PlayStation, and also Rockstar Games. So that's really, really nice. And I'll let Kris take the stage now, and I'll start sharing the presentation.
So hi, everyone. Really happy to be here. I want to say a special thank you to Debbie and Dennis for inviting me to speak. I hope I can meet everyone in person someday at the next Waterkant Festival. It just looks like a really great event, and I'm just really feel privileged to be invited to speak here today. So I wanted to talk about the use of VR for creating impact. I want to talk about why VR is a good medium for creating impact and give some key examples of how this has been done with specific projects. I'll also talk about how to get funding for impact projects and discuss some of the best practices in getting distribution and visibility. So first of all, why VR for impact? We've all heard that VR is an empathy building machine. And there was an early VR adopter called Pencils of Promise, a nonprofit that builds schools in developing areas. In 2015, they wanted to increase donations at their annual celebrity-studded gala and use a VR experience to do so. They knew that if they would show attendees what it was like to go to school in a developing nation, it could create an unmatched emotional connection that wouldn't have been there otherwise. And they really wanted to inspire more donations for their students. So at their gala, they gave attendees VR headsets that transported them to a school in Ghana. And the results were stunning. The VR experience helped Pencils of Promise raise an additional $500K for a total of $2.4 million that evening. Plus, the video was viewed nearly 2 million times on Facebook after the event, which brings me to the second aspect of VR, which is awareness. So I feel just like by sheer novelty of the technology, people are curious about VR. It gets their attention. What is this thing on people's heads? So it's a great vehicle for getting their attention and having them spread the word via word of mouth, just because they are amazed at the experience they just had. And I'll talk more about a VR experience that really capitalized on this and brought VR to the world stage in a big way. Thirdly, VR can have an impact via accessibility. And you may think, this is an oxymoron. Clearly, most people do not have headsets and don't have access to one. So what do you mean by accessibility? And I'll give you some examples of this later on and talk about how this makes things possible in ways that were not possible before. So let's dive a little deeper into how VR does all of this, which is best illustrated by some specific examples from projects that I worked on at HTC. So let's talk about empathy. I've heard from so many nonprofits that have told me stories about using 360 video and how it has increased their ability to fundraise. One recent example is the Ellen Fund, which is run by Ellen DeGeneres' company for the purpose of wildlife conservation. There's a group called Habitat XR, and they recently did a 360 video on gorillas in Rwanda. And they showed it for the first time at Ellen's big fundraising event in LA this past year. They raised $5 million in funds that night. So how is VR a contributing factor to raising that much money? First of all, VR has been known to increase just the live engagement at an event. As I said earlier, people are really curious about VR. Some are too scared to try it. They don't want to put something on their head. But once they hear that a friend is raving about an experience they had, they want to do it. So once they have a headset on, think about this. You have a captive audience. They are fully immersed. Think about that for a minute. You're at a party, you're at a gathering. There's lots of distractions to get your attention. There are people across the room that you know, and you're waving to them. There's a keynote speaker that's talking, but you're at the bar getting wine. Your phone is pinging. There are a lot of distractions, but you put on a headset and you are fully present in that moment. And you're transported in a very visceral sense. It has immediate impact. And guess what? You want to tell your friends at the party that you had this amazing experience and they want to go try it for themselves. So how does this translate into the $5 million that was raised that night for Ellen? When people have a headset on and they come out of this experience, it leads to an increased likelihood of donations from more people and it leads to higher donations by those people because they were so emotionally affected by what they saw in the headset. So those are two key things: more people and higher donations from the people who donated. And it doesn't stop there. This can lead to other avenues of donation, which I will cover in the next example. So with My Africa, this started as a 360 film for a fundraising project for Conservation International. It was going to bring funds to a little community-run elephant sanctuary in northern Kenya, where they save baby elephants that have lost their parents to poaching. The film had a lot of star power. It's narrated by Oscar winner Lupita Nyong'o, so it had more of a mass appeal because there was a voice that people recognized. Conservation International decided to also develop a fully interactive companion piece, a 6-off piece, which would allow someone in the headset to actually care for a baby elephant, checking its heartbeat, cooling it down with water, and feeding it milk from a bottle. We're going to try to show you a short clip of this experience now. So this puts you in the sanctuary, and here's baby elephant Dudu, who has just arrived at the sanctuary. And the user is giving instructions of what they need to do to help rehabilitate the elephant in the immediate. So the first thing is to sponge it down with water. And they're actually in the headset, they're using the controller, and they're going through the physical motions of sponging down the elephant. So you can imagine you're already getting attached to this little creature that you're seeing in your headset in real, graphically real to you. Checking its heartbeat. The hard part, taking a blood sample. But I think, what's important about this experience that's different from watching a 360 video, which is also great. But this is, you're actually doing this through physical motion, and that's creating more attachment. And you want to revive this baby. And now the fun part, getting to feed the milk. And this all happens after you already saw the 360 video, so you have a sense of what the sanctuary is like, how the animals came to be here. So you have a whole backstory that goes with this. So it was a really nice use of 360 video, and then also the interactive piece. Now, the great thing about this experience is not only that they used it at events to fundraise, of course, but we also published it on HTC's consumer digital store hub called Vive. And all the proceeds from the sale of this experience go directly to the Ruteti Elephant Sanctuary via Conservation International. So while the 360 video was used at big fundraisers, this gamified version of the 6-off version is on a storefront that people purchase and download, and all those sales go directly to helping the sanctuary with ongoing revenue. So that's a really powerful use of VR, both in live events and then to the home market. Now, another great example of VR having great impact is an experience called Tree. Tree was developed by a company called New Reality Co., and the concept is very simple. You become a tree in a forest. You grow from a small seed to the grandeur of a full-grown tree. It's simple in its feeling, and it's powerful in its effect. The experience is done with haptics so that you feel the wind in your leaves and you smell the lush green of the fauna. You experience the joy of being part of the forest, and then you experience the pain of dying in fire from deforestation. You smell the burning. This is a very intuitive experience. You don't do anything but stand in the headset and let the experience wash over you. Now, the incredible part of this is the influence that Tree had on the world stage. New Reality Co. was able to show this at World Economic Forum in Davos last year. They put this in front of true policymakers, the kind of people who would experience this in the headset and feel the urgency of our climate crisis and hopefully influence their decision making. At one point, the Crown Prince of Dubai had a chance to try it, and he quickly invited Tree to come to his country to show at the World Government Summit. It has since gone on word of mouth in this same manner. It has toured many different global events, from the UN to EarthX Film Festival to WEF in China to the Ministry of Education. So Tree continually brings awareness around the world, on the world stage, to people who are making decisions in real time at these events. I think that's very powerful. And then again, as this is going on out in the world, and they still continue to tour, I go to their website, you can see the events that they've been at, and things that they have planned. We also launched Tree on the consumer storefront at HTC, and all the proceeds from the sales went to Rainforest Alliance to help in their efforts to fight deforestation. So this project was powerful on the world stage and again in the living room stage, and continues to bring. So we're going to show you a very short video of this experience. It's just a really small taste of what it really is all about, but hopefully it will pique your interest. So that's a little glimpse into Tree. So we covered the obvious of empathy and awareness building. I talked earlier about accessibility. So I'd like to illustrate what I mean by that. This next project is called Life VR. This is an acronym for Life-Saving Instruction for Emergencies. It's being used to educate healthcare workers in developing countries on infant resuscitation. Doctors are usually trained in adult resuscitation, of course, but doing it for an infant is a different process. So this VR tool is literally an on-the-ground training where it's needed and where it's needed right now. The medical personnel in remote areas connect with trainers in a virtual hospital ward where they can access equipment and practice performing the tasks with a virtual instructor. This project was done by Oxford University, and they're working to launch this program in as many remote areas as possible. So I want to show you a quick video of what this actually looks like in the headset.
Take the correct size face mask and place it on the baby's face. Okay, select the best course of action to take to resuscitate the baby.
Okay, so it should be the top answer. Okay.
You can practice resuscitation and must click when they are ready to ventilate at a rate of 30 to 50 breaths per minute.
Okay, so what you're going to want to do here is one hand has to go over the mask to hold the mask in place, and the other hand has to go on the squeezy bag. So you do this by holding the trigger, and trigger will also squeeze the bag. And then you look down to see the chest rising. Okay, so that's me practicing. So now that I'm ready, I'm just going to click start.
Take the correct size face mask.
So you can see that this is interactive teaching, and we've all heard that VR is very good for not only learning things in VR, but actually retaining the information that you learned in a more effective way. So when I look at this project, I really can't think of anything else that's more impactful than this. This is literally having the potential to save lives in real time. There's just one other example of a tool-based project I want to talk about. And this is an example of VR, again, being used out in the field. It's by a company called Aludica, and they're using eye tracking technology to build an actual eye exam in VR to be used on kids who may not have immediate access to go to a doctor. It's done in the form of a game, a magic show, so the child doesn't even realize that their eyes are being checked. The game checks for basic potential eye problems, and if something is suspected as being a problem, they encourage the parents to go seek a doctor to get further medical care. Again, I think this is another project that's on the ground. It's potentially having a very positive effect of improving medical services in poor areas of Brazil. And one reason that HTC helped fund this is because it used eye tracking, which is a technology that was important to us to introduce in a new headset that we had. And I'll get to that a little bit later about how funding can coincide with a company's desire to showcase a certain technology that might be something that you can help amplify through your project. So there's another area I want to touch on, and this is the impact of VR in education and vocational training. There are companies who build VR training modules for everything from safety training to operation of big machinery, blue-collar training for plumbing, electrical workers, etc. This is an enterprise business for these companies, and it is an increasing demand, and it brings in a lot of revenue. I know of at least one of these companies that are taking their vocational training tools to impoverished neighborhoods as impact initiatives to help train adults who may not otherwise have access to schools, but they can still get skilled instruction in VR that can lead to real jobs and new careers. So I think this is a great way that a for-profit corporation can give back to less fortunate communities without much further investment of tools by them. Along the lines of diversity training, Stanford University in California also did an amazing VR experience called the 1,000 Cut Journey. This promotes sensitivity to everyday racial injustices. And when corporations got word of this project being available, they wanted to use it for their own diversity training in their companies. And then Stanford has gone on to develop this further to study the empathy tracking of this and data collection of how effective VR actually is in this regard. So this is a good example of a project being both great for corporate environments and their purposes, and then also ongoing research. So I hope you've been inspired by some of these projects. If so, your next question is probably, how can I do this? And how do I go about getting funding for my projects? So there are quite a few avenues to get funding, and there are a lot of, but I will say there are a lot of worthy projects that are out there trying to get off the ground, and the money is very tight for this. So the competition for the money is very tight. Sorry, there's actually a demonstration going on outside my house for Black Lives Matter. So you hear some shouting. That's what's happening in the US right now. Anyway, there are many great government funds that exist globally. In Europe and Canada, I think, are among the forefront of doing funding for these sorts of technology projects, and XR in particular. The AIXR, Academy of International Extended Reality, had a great list of potential funds on their website, so I encourage you to go look there. It's AIXR.org. And then there are many corporations that look for VR for Good projects to fund that they can align with impact initiatives that they're interested in. For instance, Procter & Gamble just recently commissioned a VR project about diversity, which they debuted at the Cannes Film Festival last year. Tiffany's, the jewelry company that you know, the little blue box, they fund projects that bring light to environmental impact of mining. So when you're thinking about a project, always consider, which company may benefit from the topic that you're trying to amplify. Also, another great resource are the makers of VR headsets. They're always looking for content to showcase their technology. I just talked about the eye tracking project that we helped fund because it showcased something new that we were trying to bring to light. Oculus, makers of Quest and Rift, of course, they have a VR for Good program that regularly funds projects, so they are a very good source to tap into. And then there are other companies that support XR technology that may also fund projects. I know that Unity is one tech company that has a Tech for Good program, and they do funding as well. So I also want you to consider that grant money is not your only option. You can often go to the hardware companies and they'll donate headsets for your project, either to keep during the development cycle of your project or for certain public events that you have that you've already finished your project and you need headsets to show them on. So always check that as an option. Don't just think about money, but also think about hardware donations. Then for distribution and marketing, I mentioned 2 projects that were published on Viveport. The Oculus Store also publishes VR for Good projects, and YouTube promotes and supports 360 content. And they're a great source of visibility, and they have a really dedicated team that believes in impact projects. So they're really a great company to look into for ongoing support in this. And then a really key thing for me, especially as I was funding the VR for Impact initiative at HTC, is I would always look for projects that had other nonprofit partnerships attached to them. This helped ease the funding burden on HTC or other projects, because there's other sources of funding that come into the project, and there are more people working on it, which sort of guarantees that this project will come to life and that there's money behind it. So if you can look to other organizations, nonprofits to partner with, that is really a big plus. And when you think about your project, just think about companies that might have a like-minded goal, the same as you, and so that you both have the same mission and it's a win-win for both. Lastly, I definitely encourage major film festivals as a source of getting your project out there. They often have XR exhibitions now. Cannes, Venice, Tribeca, Sundance, they all have separate areas just for XR exhibitions. And those markets are often very used for networking and finding funding and talking to other people who are doing things similar to what you are. And then there are also XR markets where it's just standalone from a film festival. It's just strictly an XR market. There's one coming up in Paris that I believe will be virtual as well. It's called New Images. So I would definitely look into that one. There's going to be a lot of amazing projects pitched there, and they bring together all kinds of different sources of people who are able to fund those projects. So it's a mixing of the content creators and then the people who can fund that. And then there are also some collectives online that collect projects and then present them to different audiences to get funding. And one of the key ones in the VR world is called Kaleidoscope. So definitely check out kaleidoscope.com. So that was a high-level overview of how VR can help improve the world, which is a big statement to say, but I really do believe that it can. The takeaways for me is that VR is still a really new, exciting technology. I think, a lot of us in the tech field, take it for granted that everyone's had a headset on their head, but it's not the case. So I think it's a new technology that people are still very innately curious about. So capitalize on this. Think about what you want to say to the world and who might want to say it with you, because that will give you ideas about the people that you can partner with. So I just want to say, hope to see some amazing ideas come out of this festival. I work really closely with Kaleidoscope, so I hope to see some projects there. And I want to thank you so much for giving me the chance to talk about VR for Impact.
Great. Thank you so much, Kris. That was great. So many good projects. It's incredible to see how far the VR world has come just in the last 6 years, I think, kind of like ever since Oculus had its Kickstarter funding come through, and then the Facebook buyout. Yeah, it's really impressive to see how many great projects have sprung up and come to be. And I like just in the last 2 weeks, when we had all these talks, we had talks with a lot of academicians kind of doing research within VR. For example, Dr. Sophia Seinfeld, she is doing research about domestic violence and rehabilitation of offenders, and they can see that VR has a really big impact in teaching these offenders to kind of recognize what they're doing, because a lot of the times they don't know, and suddenly VR can show you, hey, by the way, just swap your position a little bit, and suddenly.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And the project I talked about earlier, 1,000 Cut Journey by Stanford, that was about, just everyday social injustices, racial, and it depicts a young Black boy, and he's out in the world, and in the experience you actually look into a mirror. So when you see yourself as a little Black boy, so now you are him, and you go out in the world, and these kids on the playground give you a hard time because of your skin color. And then you come back and you look back in the mirror and you feel a little bit deflated. And when you watch somebody in the headset, they start out with a good posture and they have the headset on and they're really excited, and you see them sink a little bit as they're watching this experience. Then they grow into a teenage Black boy and they're out in the world. They get into some trouble with some police interaction. And then again, you look back in the mirror and you feel like how horrible it was to experience that. You were actually really afraid you were going to get beat by the cops. And the person in the headset is shrinking farther and farther down posture-wise. So you can tell it's really physically affecting them, and they're taking in this experience as though it's happening to them. So I think it's so powerful.
Yeah, and I mean, even just hearing the chants outside your flat right now, that's like immersive media, and it makes it does make it so much more real for us viewing this, because we don't have those chants on the streets of Kiel. But of course we see it in the news every day, and we're kind of like, our hearts are with you guys, kind of like.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm hoping some real change happens, because we've seen this so many times.
Mm-hmm.
It feels a little bit different this time, though.
It does, doesn't it? I think it really does. And we had a few speakers recently who are doing meditative VR things, and Owen Harris from Explore Deep. That was the software that he's developing together with Joanneke Wertmeister, who's doing research in that field as well. And they said one great thing about playfulness is, yes, it's kind of like serious times right now, but kind of not losing the sense of playfulness is very important.
Yeah, I agree.
Especially when people are kind of like protesting now, but at some point those protests will end and people have to go back to a normal life and then rediscover playfulness as well. So
Yeah.
that it's really interesting times we're living in, but something to be hopeful about, I think.
Yeah, I really like the phrase next normal, because it's not going back to what we knew before, but it's the next normal. So let's hope it's a better normal.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. What are you looking forward to in the next kind of like half year, or maybe like, no, not let's not say half year, let's say like in the next 5 years. Let's go into the further future of what kind of things might happen within the immersive media world that excites you, or is there anything?
Yeah, I think for me, just coming from a background of PlayStation, where I initially saw like hardware is high priced, and there's early adopters and people who are kind of into games, and they're the first ones that try out something like VR. But right now, to do PC VR, you need $600 headset, $1,500 PC laptop. It's the entry to barrier is very high. So I think when we look at something like Quest and you see how the install base of that grew so quickly, still relatively small compared to console gaming or other devices, even like when you think about a smartphone, but the prices are coming down. The accessibility is becoming easier. There's no longer a tether to a PC. It's all in one. You put on a headset, that's all you need. So I think that's going to get cheaper, better. And then you added things like hand tracking, where now I don't even have to know what a controller is, and I don't have to be a gamer per se to like try this. I can just intuitively use my body in a headset to make things work. And I think that's just going to blow people's minds. And I think there's so many things that are going to happen in that regard that we're not even prepared for right now.
That sounds great. I'm up for that. Please get those things into schools, please.
Yes, exactly.
I've got Sarah. I can see you've got your microphone there. I think you're wanting to ask questions from the chat. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. Because we have a lot of questions right now, and I think we should start with them. So first question would be from Frank or Frank. Do you know what the production budget was of these examples? He means your videos.
I don't know specifically some of them. Tree was probably in the millions, not multi-millions, but it was higher, partly because it was new technology at the time, and so they were cutting a lot of new ground. for My Africa, I don't know what the 360 budget was for that, but the interactive budget for that was relatively small. I'm going to say it was probably like somewhere 200,000-300,000. And we funded a portion of that, and the nonprofit funded the rest of that. So they can really vary. And I think with 360, and there's so many new tools as far as stitching and the camera qualities, those prices have come down. So I think production of 360s has become a bit less. 6DoF development can still be really high, depends on the production value and how much is involved. Those could be $1 million projects, or they can be really lean and mean, and maybe it's a $400,000 project.
Okay, thank you. Next question is from Peter. Hey, Kris, this is super inspiring. How did you start in the VR community first and industry later? And what would you recommend to somebody who would love to start tomorrow?
So I had a gaming background. I was a computer science major, and then I got into gaming, and that's how I ended up in VR. It was just because I had this gaming background, and VR companies knew they wanted to make games because that was the first path of revenue. So I got a little bit lucky that way. But I will say the real reason that I got interested in VR was I was a photographer, and I was really concerned about animal conservation and welfare. And I saw this, I was reading an article in a photo magazine, and this photographer said he was doing something called 360 video. And I was like, what is that? And then they used it for fundraising, and it raised more money. And I was like, wow, what is that? And I just kept that article on my desk for like over a year. And every time I went to clean my desk, I'm not going to put that away. I want it to stay right there. And I was like, one day I'm going to do this. And then that's how I got into impact using VR. It just started from learning about it, that someone else had done this. And so what I really recommend is, I think that passion takes you a long way. So to start out in VR, you don't need a gaming background per se. You don't need to be a programmer. If you're a creative person, you have ideas, you find people who can execute on those things, and you can be, someone that dives in from that direction. And I think you'll find there's a really small community in VR that I really love. It's like, you go to these different events, you see the same faces, people really support each other like no other technology that I've seen. It feels like people really want everyone else to do well, and they really want to help each other. And so it's been this really wonderful, close-knit community. Once you tap into it, you will find a lot of resources and people that want to help you.
Sounds really, really nice and warm. Dennis, sorry, I interrupted you. You wanted to say something?
Yeah, on that point, actually, me and Debbie are giving, through Open Campus, we're giving free VR sessions every semester. So if you want to join us, just check the Open Campus website, and you can kind of get like a basic primer on making VR. There's also, I think there's a local VR group in Kiel as well, meeting up quite regularly in the starter kitchen. So yeah, there are people out there kind of wanting to do stuff, and I can mirror that as well. You don't need to be like a technically super genius. You can be a sound designer. You can want to make music. Music is so important in VR. So yeah, if you've got any kind of talent, just join or if you have no talent at all, discover it in those VR groups. So yeah, just wanted to mirror that kind of sentiment from Kris.
Yeah, no, I'll say, like, I actually, I hadn't had a headset on my head when I was, looking into this, and I went to a local meetup group, and they were doing demos, and that was my first exposure, was like literally a meetup group, and it was great.
Yeah, sounds really nice. Thank you. Next question is from Modeus. What can be a basic toolkit for creating projects for beginners?
Oh, I would say definitely tap into Unity and Unreal. Those two are like engines that have a lot of pre-built things that you can start to build VR projects with. And then also there's things like, just if you are in a headset, like playing around with things like Tilt Brush and some of the creative tools in VR, just to familiarize yourself with what's there. So yeah, it really will depend on your project, but again, I think find people that are doing things like you are, and they're going to have a lot of advice for you about what tools are like specifically good to try.
Yeah, thank you. Next is Frank again. Is it kaleidoscope.com with a K in front?
It's with a K, and I think it is .com. If you were to Google Kaleidoscope and then VR, you'll find it.
Thanks. Next question. We have 3 left, I think. Wait a second. Again, Modeus, could you please provide the link for the collaboration project you mentioned you are engaged in? And
oh yeah, that is Kaleidoscope.
Send it to. Yeah. Okay. It is.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
It seems to be
yeah, Dennis.
It seems to be kaleidoscope.fund, actually.
Oh, okay.
So F-U-N-D, F-U-N-D.
Okay, cool. Thanks for correcting. Frank again, 360 or real-time 3D. What has the bigger future in VR?
What has the bigger future? But
In
say the
VR.
first one.
Did you understand me?
Say the first part again.
Okay. 360 or real-time 3D.
Oh, yeah. I think they both are going to have a place, because I think 360s are always going to be easy for people to watch. They don't need an expensive headset. They're YouTube channels, and there are a lot of apps that show 360s. So they aren't as sexy right now, because it was like kind of how things started, and then people wanted to go to the more complicated 3D sixed off experiences. So 360 sort of got put by the back of the room. But I think, like I said before, most people have not tried VR yet. So that's a really great entry point. And it's a really easy thing for people to just put on a headset and not have to worry about controllers and knowing what to do. But of course, 3D, 3-dot or 6-dot experiences in VR, that's where a lot of power can come into play, where you can physically interact with your environment, like you saw with My Africa and caring for the baby elephant. That actually gives you physical muscle memory of what you had experienced. So I think that's always going to be that, and that'll just continue to evolve. All of a sudden it'll be no more controllers, it'll just be hand gesturing, eye tracking. All of those things will just make it seem like the headset is part of your body, and that will be amazing.
Yeah, sounds amazing and a little bit crazy still. but
still
good.
very futuristic, yes.
Yeah, really, but really amazing. Our last question is from Leopold. How much resources, hardware, software, money is necessary to do something useful?
Yeah, it depends on the project. Again, though, like I would go back to like some of the enterprise companies that were using, like they were doing these training modules, and then just taking what was meant as an enterprise revenue generating tool gets changed into something that can be used for impact in a different way. So there are those sorts of things that can just transfer from things that are already built and used for a different purpose. But in general, I won't lie, VR can be expensive, and it can take a lot of expertise in programming. Programmers aren't expensive. I mean, aren't cheap. But I think that's what the funding is there for. Really interested in funding this new technology because they want to get it off the ground. Companies are interested in it because it's the new thing, and it does get people's attention. It's immersive like nothing else is. So yes, it's expensive, and a lot more people are wanting to get involved and do it. And so the funding is harder and harder to come by. But it's out there, and there are other people trying to do similar things, and you find them. It's like birds of a feather. So I encourage you to look into it if you're at all interested or passionate about this.
Yeah, and so do you believe it will get cheaper by the years?
I do. The hardware will get cheaper. The tools will get better. It's almost like, like photography. All of a sudden everyone knows how to use Lightroom and Photoshop, and the tool gets better and better and cheaper to do things, and people can live stream, things themselves. And, I think all these new technologies just get more accessible, easier to use, therefore cheaper. So yeah, I do think it'll get less expensive.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I have to check the questions, but yeah, that's the last question. Dennis, do you want to ask something, some last questions? Because we have 1 minute left.
One question. Okay.
Yeah, no hurry, but we are now at the by the end. So.
Okay. So probably 30 seconds left. Kris, what are you gonna do with the rest of your day?
Well, maybe go join the protest outside my window. But I'm gonna think about my experience here, because I think just, it's really great to hear so many people interested in asking these questions, because I know that there are people out there that really innately want to do good in the world. And that's the one thing that I've found working with VR for Impact, is that, there are more people in the world wanting to change things for the good and do amazing things. That just really makes my heart really big. It's like, there are more of us than them, I guess. And so that's what I'm going to think about after this talk.
That's some nice closing words.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
That's another thing from Leopold, basically kind of questioning why some specific problems are being addressed and others are not. And I think this isn't like an either or question. Kind of like looking at one problem does not cancel out kind of looking at other problems.
Yeah.
So it's really about kind of trying to get as many people as possible into VR so that we can have perspectives on many different things.
Right, exactly.
That's the goal in the end. So great. Thank you so much, Kris. That was really enjoyable.
Thank you. It was really fun, and you made it very easy.
We're trying hard. We're trying very hard.